The St. Charles County Veterans Museum is a 501c3 nonprofit business. The museum would not exist without the donations of our generous community. Your donations ensure the museum continues to share and preserve the stories of our veterans. Would you like to be part of something special? To donate, visit sccvetsmuseum.org and click on Donate. The Dog Tag Podcast may at times cover sensitive topics including, but not limited to, suicide, abuse, violence, severe mental illness, sex, drugs, and alcohol addiction. You are advised to refrain from watching or listening to the Dog Tag Podcast if you are likely to be offended or adversely impacted by any of these topics. Neither the company, host, director, or guests shall at any time be liable for the content covered, causing offense, distress, or other reaction. The information, opinions, and recommendations presented in this podcast are for general information only. The primary purpose of the Dog Tag Podcast is to educate. The views, information, or opinions expressed on the Dog Tag Podcast are solely the views of the individuals or guests involved and by no means represent absolute facts. The Dog Tag does not accept responsibility for their views or comments. This podcast is sponsored by the Renee Esri Allstate Agency, located here in O'Fallon, Missouri. She is licensed in Missouri and Illinois and focuses on your personal and commercial insurance needs. Her office is located at 2764 Highway K, O'Fallon, Missouri 63368. She can be reached at 636-379-9556 or by email reneeessry@allstate.com, RENEEESSARY@allstate.com. If you are shopping for insurance and want an active agent that will educate and advise you on the coverage you need, reach out to her. Welcome to the Dog Tag Podcast from the St. Charles County Veterans Museum with your host, Jason Galvin and Jim Higgins. Today in studio, we have Salina and Zach Mann. Jim, go ahead and kick us off.
Well, welcome, guys. I want to say that this is the absolute first time we've ever had a married couple that are both veterans in the studio, and that's kind of exciting. First off, before I ask how you met, I'd like to get an idea from both you guys. You know, we've been volunteer Army since 1973, and we'd like to ask people, why did you choose to join the Army?
So I joined because, well, I've got military family. My dad was in the Army, and then I've got two great uncles that were also in, and my great-grandfather and my grandfather. So I originally wanted to do that. It was a little hard for me to get in, so I kind of gave up a little bit because I knew what I wanted to do. I wanted to do psychological operations, and there wasn't always room for me. So I gave up. I went to college for a semester, realized I couldn't keep paying. So then I went back in and tried again. And that was a story that she wrote.
And Zach, how about you?
The main reason I joined was I was working at a gas station at the time, and I didn't really want to work there anymore. And I didn't really know what I wanted to do with my life. So I just thought the military would have been the best bet for me. She did not like that I was joining the military.
Yeah, I wanted to put a little caveat in there. It caused a really big rift between us when we were dating. I was absolutely against him going in. I think it went something along the lines of, if you go to the recruiter, let me come with you. He went to the recruiter without me.
Didn't.
If you pick a job, let me go with you. By the time I got there, he already picked a job.
I was going to go infantry, but she kind of...
Oh, I said it was going to be over if you go infantry.
So this is 2008 you met.
Yes. And then 2009. Wasn't it?
No, it was 2010. Because it was, you joined right when I got my orders.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah. I was furious.
So you took the military test, ASFAB test, and you chose your MOS. Zach, what was that?
91 Alpha, which is an Abrams tank system maintainer that I never really did outside of training, and then the last 3 months of my Army career, I was Hotel 8 certified. So I drove an 88, and I also drove a wrecker, trained to pick up broken stuff that's broke down in the field. And then when I went overseas, we didn't really use the 88. So I was more so like a QA QC inspector for all the infantry guys, the cav guys, and all their vehicles. And I was like, man, I don't want to do this the whole entire deployment. This really stinks. And then our company had a logistics team. They would provide security for like Class 9 and like Class 1 and all that other stuff. And they're like, hey, we have an opening. I was like, I'll go. And yeah, that's basically what I did. So I was QA QC for 2 months in Iraq, and then the rest of my tour, I was a driver and a gunner on an MRAP.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you take an Army test and don't use any part of it.
Yep.
I think that happens a lot, though.
It really does. I mean, we had cooks in guard towers, 12 on, 12 off with an AT4. And I mean, like, this ain't what you signed up for. He's like, no, but it's better than making them eggs or whatever the heck they were making in there. So,
and Salina, I mean, psych ops, you got to be pretty smart for that.
Well,
now,
thanks.
Yeah, I mean, you do. I mean, I hear you got to score really high
Well,
on that.
So you have, I think the Army requires like a 31 total score on your ASVAB. But then you have like the line scores.
That 110 GT score, you probably had at least a 110.
I did. So you have to have a higher score in your GT score. So like just your psychological thinking to go into PSYOP. And I did get that. It was a really unique experience. I knew I wanted to do that because I like talking to people, and I like really getting to understand like other cultures. And that was the only job that I could figure out would be for me. Because, well, information officer too, like IO, but you had to have a really high clearance for that. And you do for PSYOP as well. But I was able to just get secret clearance instead of top secret. Because in order to get top secret, I was going to have to give up my dual citizenship. Because I have dual citizenship from Germany and here.
Okay.
So PSYOP was the way to go.
So if you Google PSYOPs, it pretty much says something to the effects like, I was joking before we went on air, you're messing with people's minds, but it does talk about propaganda and spinning stories to persuade people.
You mentioned it was like marketing almost.
It can be like marketing. That would be the civilian equivalent.
Persuasion.
So the motto for psychological operations is to persuade, change, and influence the minds of others.
Now, I'm sitting here thinking I'm married to a psych ops guy, Zach. How's that work?
How does that work?
Well, she says that she doesn't use her powers on me, but I've kind of caught her doing it. I don't think she realizes that she's doing it.
Give me an example. I disagree. We're going to get into this deep.
Give you an example?
I feel like I work really hard not to. I'm going to be honest.
I'll come back to that. I'll think of an example because I thought about
Happens
it
all
just
the time,
recently.
right?
Yeah.
I do know that I've asked you before.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel
You're
like I
go ahead,
encouraged you to marry me?
Yeah, she's like, do you think I tricked you into marrying me? And I'm like, you didn't trick me. I said, you didn't fucking trick me.
But how would you know?
Exactly.
That's the thing. I don't know.
Are you even really here? We don't know.
None of us know if we're here. We're in a simulation.
No, it is a really unique thing. And really all it is to get to know your target audience, which is why, it's equivalent to civilian marketing. You need to know who you're talking to, why you're talking to them, and what do you want from them. And then, you're going to have to go in and kind of start that conversation. There's no way that in either Iraq or Afghanistan that you would have been able to go into someone's home and say, hey, do you know where this guy is? It doesn't work that way there. It just doesn't. You're not going to go anywhere. You'll never be welcomed into their home. So it's kind of more like a 3 cups of tea situation, and you have to be aware of that going in, and then what your desired outcome is. And so that's kind of what PSYOP teaches you.
So you were over in, what year were you over in Iraq?
Zach was actually in Iraq.
You were in Afghanistan.
I was in Afghanistan. I was there 2010 to 2011.
And I try to think what's in 2010, 2011. 2011, we got Osama bin Laden.
Yep.
Yes, we did. I was there.
Sure did.
Were you?
I was. There was a lot of PSYOP we had to do for that. Yeah, I got a call in my B hut. The PSYOP was, because we're detachments, really unique compared to what Zach went through. I was in a compound. Yeah, but I got the phone call that the SEAL team did it, and we got him. And the next step was to calm the country down, because we still have much more work to do.
That had to have been a little bit of a scary time, because there was a lot of supporters of him, and you probably didn't quite know what was going to happen in the days after that, did you?
We had no idea what was going to happen, but the name of the game is to get ahead of it. You know, we did have lots of riots outside of Forward Operating Base Shank is where I was, and on top of, you know, where my guys were, because we weren't all together. It was a detachment. So there was 4 of us at FOB Shank, and then there was teams of 3 around the rest of the area, you know, Logar, Wardak, and things like that. So getting to them and making sure that they were okay and knowing what to do, it's going to be really important.
Was there proximity to the capture, or were you guys pretty far away from?
He was captured in Pakistan.
He was captured in Pakistan. Yeah. Yeah, he was in Pakistan. I want to say it was a little over 100 miles.
Okay.
Of where I was and where my guys were.
Reasonably close.
Yeah, I mean, considerably close, you know, enough to where...
It's like to the Ozarks in here.
Yeah, we had some concerns. You know, we needed to make sure that we can continue our mission. And, yeah, so we just, you know, communication was going to be key.
So did you speak the language? Do you speak?
We were just talking about it over here. No, I did not. I think the only things that I can remember, you know, it's traditional salam alaikum, alaikum salam, and then wadarega, which, if I remember correctly, means stop. No, we had an interpreter, and being a female, I really actually wasn't able to speak a lot to very many people at all. So a lot of it went through, you know, my guys, or I was attached to the, I was actually attached a lot. 10th Mountain, 173rd, and 101st were out of Bagram that we reported to as well.
Well, one of the more interesting points about the time that you were over there, to me, women weren't officially in combat until, what, 2013?
Yeah.
But you were at risk all those days you were there. You were combat trained, I'm sure.
Yes.
You carried a M16, I guess. And
I carried an M4 and a 9mm on my side.
So, I mean, it's dangerous. We know of stories, women driving convoys, things like that. They're shot at regular. And the idea or concept that women aren't in combat is baloney.
Yeah. I mean, we had women go, you know, everywhere. I went on a few missions with my guys. And really, because I wanted to be able to, like, what are you guys doing? Like, let me go with you and let me check this out, see what I can do. I was unsuccessful in accomplishing much because I ran into, you know, school children, which they didn't want to talk to me. They'd never seen me. I hadn't built a relationship. And then, you know, the women, they would much rather come on base. And so that's where I had a lot of my conversations, is bringing women onto the base and talking about that, and partnering with civil affairs a lot. PSYOP partners with civil affairs a whole lot.
And Zach, you know, the same time you were in Iraq, 2010, we were starting to draw down.
Yeah, well, I was there February 2011 until December 2011. And yes, I drove in a convoy of about, 45 trucks out of Iraq into Kuwait. We closed down our Cobb.
Okay. Yeah. And that had to have been a little bit of a stressful time. Oh. Anytime I think the military hears drawdown, they get a little nervous. Mm-hmm. It means we don't have enough now, we're going to have less.
True. And I don't even want to say we closed it down. We basically handed the reins over to the State Department. And we got word, I think 3 or 4 days later when we were in Kuwait, that they did some pretty hefty damage to Cobb Basra right when we left.
That was a very quiet exit that I don't think everybody knew over there that you were really leaving.
We didn't know we were closing it down until maybe a month out.
Well, you couldn't even tell me. Huh? You couldn't even tell me.
In April, we got word that it could potentially be a 16-month deployment.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. But like a lot of things were in the works that I didn't know about. Like I said, we didn't even know. Like my first sergeant didn't know until a month out. So it was very stressful getting everything scrambled together, and once you drive your truck into Kuwait, like you turned it in, and we were done with it. So they kept it.
Any holdover time in Kuwait before you left?
Yeah, I think I was there for about 2 weeks, and then we came home. We came home 2 weeks before Christmas.
What was the cycle for the tours? Was it 4 months, 8 months? What?
It's usually a year.
A year, okay.
Yeah, but I made it to 9 months and some change. So
before you guys went to Kuwait?
Yeah, before we drove to Kuwait.
To Kuwait, okay.
Mm-hmm. So you met in 2008. You knew each other now. You were probably communicating halfway around the world. The signal was probably coming back to the United States and then back over to there. But with one of a partner, stationed in a war zone, there's stress. But both of you are stationed in war zones. How was that? I mean, it had to have been real worrisome on a day-to-day basis.
Well,
it was awful.
It was.
You want to?
Well, I went on R&R in June of 2011. She was coming home. You came home Father's Day, didn't you?
I did.
And super excited to see her at my dad's house, waiting for her. And we talked, and she told me it wasn't going to work out.
I think we need to backtrack a little bit.
Okay, go ahead.
When I was going, it was definitely more that I wasn't going to come back. In my head, this was going to be hard. I was going to come back. I didn't want to put more on him since he was going to be in training. I'd gone back and forth. And so the first phone call he got to call me, I had made my decision. As we were engaged, and I said, I think we need to call off the engagement.
This was in basic training, by the way.
He was in basic training.
When I was in basic training.
And
my one and only call.
You already had one strike against you, though, with the recruiter.
Yeah, well.
Right.
Well, I think she kind of forgave me after a while.
I did. But to get my head where I felt like I needed to be, I didn't want to be engaged. I had to be fully in for this. So I ended our engagement. While I was over there and you got out of training, you told me you were getting ready to go to Iraq, and we decided to try things out and see how things were going to go. We could do this, if we're both going to be in a war zone, why not do it together? But yeah, when I saw you on your R&R on my time back, I wasn't ready. I wasn't ready for that because I knew he was going back. And he messaged me. He sent me an email because, we did that back then. Mm-hmm. He sent me an email for my birthday. He said, happy birthday. And then...
no, we need to backtrack a little more.
We need to backtrack a little more?
Yeah, because you just went all the way. Once that happened, I think I was going back to Iraq in 3 or 4 days. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. When I got back there, it's time difference, so it was kind of hard to reacclimate, but even with that was rough.
Yeah.
I definitely, knowing now, I tore his world upside down. I did not make it easier for him to go back to war. I I was done. I was fine.
And if you think about it, I mean, that probably happens more often than we talk about, where those stressors kind of, you go back to a war zone or go back to, first of all, you're separated, you go back to a war zone, and now you're dealing with the stressors of your personal life on top of the stressors of your professional life.
Yeah.
So if either of you guys could speak to how you manage that type of stress when you're managing both of those things at the same time.
The gym.
He went to the gym a lot. I wasn't upset about it, though.
I was a big boy when I came back. I went to the gym a lot.
Unfortunately, I was already back home. It's not what I wanted to do. I drank a lot. And so it wasn't until he did send me that email, happy birthday. I was like, okay, maybe we can talk a little bit. And then he came home in December. His
18th.
Yeah.
I think I landed in
His family invited me to go down to Fort Hood to surprise him, and I was like, if he says no, I'm stuck in Fort Hood, Texas by myself. So I surprised him at the airport in St. Louis when he came back home, and I asked him, maybe we can try again.
She didn't ask. She had a big old poster.
I did. I have a big poster. I said, will you be mine again?
And she made me check yes or no on a big old poster board.
Love it.
It's marketing.
Yeah.
That's
See?
right. Psychological operations.
You did fucking trick me.
It's too late now. We're over a decade.
What can you do?
Well, it's, we interview a lot of veterans, and it's challenging if one's a veteran, the going overseas, a deployment, the stressors, the marriage is often a casualty, but you guys both went. I don't know whether that's a good thing, that helped you understand what the other one's going through, or whether it doubled the amount of stress.
I think, Jim, a little bit of both.
I was about to say that too. I was like, it was definitely both, because we had some rocky patches. I don't want to say
It was hard.
it was very hard.
It was hard because we both managed our stress after war very differently.
Yeah.
Very differently. And in fact, it wasn't until recently, the last year, that you and I opened up even a little bit about what we both went through.
Yeah.
And at that point, we'd been married for so long. And I think, the biggest key to that was communicating and being willing. But I'll tell you what, we went through multiple times where I think both of us weren't sure if we were going to make it in the marriage after war. But we were committed.
Well, and that the other part of that is, of course, the stressors that you experience in that, we hear very regular that things like PTSD doesn't show up for a long, long time until you're removed from the situation. So you can't possibly anticipate, what's going to come down the road in the years ahead. So
And different triggers.
yes,
Yeah,
With
absolutely.
different triggers, different personalities, different processing. So I guess tell us a little bit about how you guys do that now.
I'll let you go first on this one.
You're talking about how we manage.
Yeah, you get some rocky patches. Now you guys are opening up and talking to it a little bit more. Is that helping you? Is that?
Oh yeah, I believe so. And I mean, like, honestly, I think the key to being married, being married and staying married, is to like open up, be honest, even if it's something that's uncomfortable. And honestly, I didn't really even know that until, was that last year?
Yeah.
Last year, we needed help. We went to marriage counseling. I mean, it was online, but I mean, honestly, I think that really helped us open up more as a couple.
Was it difficult as a veteran, as a man, to be vulnerable enough to talk about your experiences that impacted maybe some of the things you're going through?
Oh yeah, it's very difficult. But I mean, I wanted our marriage to be. I wanted to work. I didn't want to lose her. I didn't want to. I mean, she's my world, man.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, and I think I will never forget that day.
oh, the first day. Talking about the first.
Where we say we need to go to counseling? Or the first day of counseling?
The first day of counseling. I thought that's what you were talking about.
Yeah. The first day of counseling was a morning following a very heated argument, actually.
I was very inebriated, too.
Well, and I think that's, a part of it is you were dealing with a loss. It wasn't a military loss, but you were dealing with a loss.
And my uncle just passed away.
And, well, your best friend passed away. And there was no communication from him on when he was coming home, and he was intoxicated, but he got a ride home. It was a very safe ride, but I was frustrated, and I didn't know how to explain my frustrations. And for me, I know now after going through so much help and starting a new journey, and that I didn't realize that I needed the communication from him, because that is a trigger for me. I need to be communicated with, because I didn't always get that when I was overseas. And he didn't know. I actually ended up punching him in the arm pretty hard.
Chest, actually.
Oh, it was in the chest. I did.
Oh, yeah.
And I do not condone any sort of violence. But
okay.
in the moment,
waiver, it's okay.
yeah, no, I just want to say that. But it was out of character for me. But at the time, I was really scared. I was scared. I was triggered. I didn't know what was going on in his head. And but we were able to talk it out. And it took us a long time to get to a point where we really understood each other, because we got married as one person. But Jim, as you said, PTSD and triggers and stressors don't come about until later, and it can be way later. So we got married as one person, and we grew into different people, and we never recognized that for each other.
Well, the other thing that's we hear pretty regular is, even setting the PTSD aside, the first day you don't put the uniform on and you're transitioning to the civilian life, that's stressful for very many people. So you were both going through that.
Yeah, I think for me it was a little different. I was reserved. I came back a different person, obviously. But I still had, in my mind, there was a distinction. I was, Salina in the uniform was a different person than Salina outside of the uniform. But hon, it was really hard for you.
Well, I kind of had I had that freedom, I got my DD-214, freaking flipped forward to the middle finger, and I was happy for, I don't know, maybe a couple weeks. And then it just started getting out of control. I drink a lot, and for my PTSD, I consume cannabis. It helps me. It's wonderful. But I think I was going a little overboard with it right when I came back. I was just so happy that I'm out of the military, all this, and then that's when it hit me. Man, what the hell am I going to do? I had her as support, but I didn't have my buddies supporting me. And it did get really hard.
Do you think it's like an identity crisis of sorts, where you have this one identity while you're in the service and you're around all your guys and their camaraderie and the daily things the grind you go through, the things you guys know each other are going through it, and then all of a sudden it's not there on a daily basis?
And I think that's what hit me the hardest. That was the hardest thing for me. It wasn't I missed the service. I missed my brothers and my sisters, that they had my back no matter what.
I think your friends grew a different direction.
Yeah, I had two pretty solid boys that I hung out with all the time. We went to the gym in Iraq together, and we were inseparable. We all got out around the same time, and we kind of kept in touch, through Facebook or whatever. And then just one day it dropped off, and I wasn't hearing anything from anybody. And the people that I actually still do talk to from the Army, I didn't deploy with. One of my buddies, he lives in Indiana, and he was in Korea while I was overseas, or when I was in Iraq, he was overseas too. And he's one of my best friends. And another one, he was in Afghanistan, and he came to our unit afterwards. And we've been buddies ever since. We're actually going to go visit them in April.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, I think, the identity crisis is definitely there, Jason. And for Zach, it was a lot different. And I didn't understand why he was having that problem. I ended up having my identity crisis well after, actually, because I had a plan set in place. When I came back from Afghanistan, I was going to go to school to be a teacher. Then that did not work out. It takes a really special person to be a teacher. And I am not that special anymore.
I never was. Don't worry about it.
But that was my plan. That was my plan for a long time, even when I was in the military. And I wanted to change the world, but for little kids. And when that wasn't a thing for me anymore, I think that's when it really hit me. So it was, we had moved back to St. Louis. It was like 3 years after we'd already been here. And I was like, what am I going to do now? Like, what do I do? And I had no idea. I ended up going back to my previous job, which I'm so grateful for. I'm really good at it, and I was able to, pull it together. But that's when a lot of, I know for me, like my PTSD started really hitting, is when I didn't know what to do anymore. That's when I started having the thoughts of when I was in the Army, this was so much easier, and that's when the dreams and the remembering, because, and I know you know this, but when we moved back to the States, I did not have any friends back left, or not back to the States, back to St. Louis. And I didn't stay in contact with them when I was in Texas with him, because we had moved very quickly. We got married. He came back in December. We got married in March. I moved in May. And I don't know. So it was all very crazy. And I didn't talk to anyone that I was in the service with. I did not associate with myself with the Army. I didn't want to. I disconnected that entire chapter of my life until recently, actually. And so he was proud. You were proud of what you were able to accomplish. You were proud of what you did, and what you got to be a part of. And I think that was hard for you to understand where I was coming from. So I think, again, it just goes back to knowing we needed help to communicate that.
So you both had a little different experience that way.
Yeah, absolutely.
The support network, when the veterans come home, I sounds like it's a very good thing to stay in touch with the veterans and to be able to work that, but you kind of took a different direction.
I did. I was not happy with, at the time, I didn't feel like what I had accomplished was a good thing. And then, to be quite honest, it wasn't until we pulled out of Afghanistan that everything came tumbling down. Because when we saw it on the news, I ended up taking the next day off because I was like, I worked so hard. What are you doing? And that's when I started realizing, I did do stuff, and we did stuff, and we worked so hard to give Afghanistan what they had, and it just all came tumbling down. And I think that when all that happened, it hit me hard, and that's when the nightmare started.
Well, Salina, more so than maybe you, Zach, you were in a position trying to help the people you were working closely with them, it sounds like.
We ended up doing some really cool things. We sent a bunch of local nationals to do their Hajj with the Jordanians, and I got to know a lot of the local nationals. And so, yeah, it was, and knowing where, you would see everything on the news, I had been there. I knew where Bagram was. I had been there. I had flown out of there. I had visited there numerous times. And so seeing all that just come tumbling down was really hard. And I think, was it hard for you, Zach, to leave Iraq the way that you did, knowing that it was?
I wouldn't say it was hard, but it was simple.
Yeah.
My time there, because you always knew what you were going to do.
You weren't connected to the people.
No, I was
Salina
not.
was.
I met a couple of them, but I didn't have a relationship like she did with the local nationals there. I talked to a lot of the IA and the IPs, like the Iraqi Army, Iraqi police that had their checkpoints up or whatever. But I should say my interpreter talked to them. But yeah, I didn't have that intimate relationship with like the kids and the women and the nationals and all that. No.
Yeah. And I think that's what really separated us for a long time. What made kind of like our relationship hard until you and I were able to kind of like really talk about. But the great thing is, I got to tell you, he was always willing to he was ready when I was ready. And I hope you felt the same way.
Do you feel like you were able to compartmentalize kind of like just the saying that I hear, we just went over and did our job? When you were in Iraq, were you able to compartmentalize what your job was and think about it that way, or were you thinking about it in a broader sense of the whole mission?
I mean, I just thought I was doing a job. I didn't really think about the mission until, I don't know, probably about a year after I got out. And then I don't think we should have been in Iraq. That was kind of where I was coming from, because I started noticing a lot of things that just didn't make sense. And then I think I got a little depressed because of that. Like, I wasted a year of my life, and my life could have ended for what we were doing over there. I mean, I don't know. Like I said, like, everything changed. Like, we were there for 12 months. Then it was going to be 16. Like, oh no, we're leaving in a month. So a lot. It was really confusing. And then I could act like, once I got out, I could take a step back and be like, oh, okay, yeah, that didn't make sense. That didn't make sense why we were there. So,
Thank you for sharing that.
yeah.
And I think that the one thing that I think everybody, whether military or not, you got to have some satisfaction in what you're doing in your job, or you're never going to be happy. You know, I think that one takeaway we hear quite a bit now is the veterans looking back and feeling like what little they did accomplish was wasted. And I don't know if that's because of all the social media, all the attention that it today. We're so divisive in many things right now. Very different experiences. That's kind of interesting.
Yeah. But I think I don't know. You know, I always tell him that we had to go through what we had to go through in order to really just cherish what we had before. Yeah. You know, the canceling of the engagement and being separated from each other for almost 2 years. And I think that's what makes it really unique, is because we did not meet in the military. Yeah. And we lost essentially what we had, or we thought we lost it for good. And so then coming back together, we knew that this is the path we wanted to take, and we worked really hard. And we're going to continue to work hard to have what we have. And, you know, because we know veterans that, like, they were married and they met in the service, and unfortunately it didn't work out. I think a lot of our friends actually who got married
To another service member.
To another service member, it did not work out for them, because that's where they met. That's how they had their life. And we knew there was a life outside of the military for us. So I think it makes it really unique. We could have totally easily, though, not had a successful marriage so far. Mm-hmm. You know, there has been numerous times where I think both of us could have just, like, I can't do this anymore.
Well, unfortunately, the numbers bear what you're saying. It's, you know, divorce rate among veterans is higher than the public.
Oh, for sure.
Did you lose any friends to suicide?
Yeah.
We did. We've lost a few, actually. Mm-hmm. You want to talk about that?
Not really.
Okay. You know, is it okay if I say a few words?
I had a high school friend. His name was Mark. He was in Baghdad, and I was in Basra. And we would chat, like, send each other Facebook messages or whatever. And he was having a really hard time over there. He was a 13 Fox. And he got pretty banged up. And once he came home, everything was great. He was about to be a dad. And I think he was stationed in Fort Riley. But he wasn't married, still living in the barracks. And his barracks mate found him. Mm. But yeah, that was a really hard one.
We've had quite a few. A friend of mine who actually replaced my PSYOP team, you know, we got to know them. he didn't make it through the battle at home. And we tried. Others have been way more successful than us, but we had a Facebook group, P6 is what it was called.
That was dedicated to my battalion commander who committed suicide. It's one of the strongest men I've ever knew.
Which I think that was one that really got us.
That dude into hell.
You can, on the outside, you can have the highest rank. You can be so strong and have the mentality or show that you have a mentality of something, but you never really know what's going on inside someone's head.
And we've heard many times that the battle really starts when you get home, because you have those unseen scars that the people that aren't missing a limb or an eye or something like that, the internal scars that no one can see, that no one can associate with.
Yeah.
It's hard for them to understand what you've gone through or what you're going through. And that mental battle is very difficult, and sometimes people lose their lives over it. 22 people a day, 22 veterans a day.
I've got a shirt that says that right now.
And I'm sure that might not be all of the reporting, so it could be higher, I know that's very vulnerable, Zach, for you to be able to talk about that, but the veterans that we work with, that's a battle they battle every day, And thank you for sharing that, and, So, yeah, those unseen scars, the battle starts when you get home.
The other thing that we believe here is the public has no understanding of what our modern veterans are, how they're fighting when they come home. They don't get it. Now, I know that we've had combatants, Vietnam, other eras, and I do think it's a little bit different, today. Mm-hmm. But I think generally what is different is the public doesn't understand in this modern age that our veterans are coming home so troubled and struggling with that.
Yeah, why can't you just go back and work, right?
Yeah.
Why can't you be normal? Why can't you talk to people?
Why can't you drive a half an hour by yourself?
So, that's, I don't think we understand that. I mean, there was generally probably more understanding of it when people were coming home in mass, from World War II and the benefits and calling out that they need attention. And there was how many that served in Vietnam and smaller numbers coming home staggered from Iraq and Afghanistan.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And, I think on that too, I know you did. We always had suicide prevention classes and how all those went. But quite honestly, it was never looked at like, guys, pay attention.
No, it was just checking
It was literally checking a box. I mean, people are snickering and joking, and you walk out of the room and you're like, oh, are you okay, buddy? You're not going to take your life, right? And I say that because that's exactly what happened, though. Mm-hmm. You get there, and so you're joking around, but then when the time comes, you're terrified. You are absolutely terrified to reach out to that buddy, to be like, hey, I'm having an issue. I can't tell you how many times I've messaged. I do talk to some of the people I was in the military with. Unfortunately, none really that I specifically deployed with yet. I'm just not there. But I've had a paragraph typed up. I'm struggling. I'm looking for help, and I would delete it because I can't. And it wasn't until you actually, Zach, was like, what about your civil affairs chick? Mm-hmm. I messaged her. I knew that she wouldn't, judge me, but I was like, hey, I'm really struggling with this collapse here in Afghanistan. Like, how are you feeling? And we were able to talk a little bit. And so I knew it was going to be okay, but.
Do you think it's harder for women?
Absolutely. 100%.
It's because they're treated differently.
We're treated very differently.
Like
I could go up for hours.
Yeah. I mean, I saw it in my company too. All the women were treated differently. It's.
I was told before, like, we got our orders. I got a phone call that, hey, just so you know, you're going to get your official orders in the mail. You're deploying. And it was at our next drill. I was told, you better not freaking get pregnant, in order to avoid this. I'm like, what? So I told him, I'm like, hey, be careful. I don't want to be that girl, No, but we are, there is this stigma behind women that we don't want to be a part of this, that we don't want to give it our all. And then when I was in, there was a mixture of, the older generation and the newer generation. And I deployed with 16 guys. It was me and 16 guys. And so, no, it is a lot harder. I mean, I could go on for hours, but it is so much harder because you don't know if that person really does have your back. I unfortunately did not feel the camaraderie all the time that my husband felt. And so it has been a bigger struggle for me still, knowing if what I did made a difference.
That's interesting dynamic change there between the two of you and your experience. And one of the statistics that we hear is that 22% of the armed forces is women, and they get a different type of perspective because if you're thinking about traditional roles, women take more of the family pressures or load and all of those things. And so a lot of women that are deployed are thinking about those things in the background, about the kids that they have or the things at home that need to be taken care of. And sometimes the other person is deployed too, and sometimes they're not. Did that impact you at all, or?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the reasons why I made the decision I did to end our engagement. We were so lucky to not have children at the time. But it is because we had, our first daughter that I got out. I didn't want to do it anymore. I didn't want to be one of those cute videos on Facebook of coming home. I didn't want to have to put my kid through that or my kids. And
I didn't want to put my kids.
And that's, I think we had a really good conversation about it. Mm-hmm. It's like, enough's enough.
Shoot, they tried to send me to Korea. I was not going.
Yeah, and I will never forget, like, oh my God, I'm going to be doing this by myself. And on top of that, I was supposed to have drill, But I did think about that. I was constantly thinking of my family and how my dad was going to be and taking care of him and my brother. I took care of my brother growing up too. So, it does put a different dynamic on how you are out there.
And then also just real quick, we've talked to, and we have a good relationship with some female veterans that we've interviewed or talked to, and that Jim knows very well. And that stigma of reaching out and saying, "Hey, I need help," and not being pegged in a certain hole of, well, there's something wrong with you, now we need to put you on medication or something like that. Instead of helping you walk through that thing. Was, in your experience, did either of you guys have a situation where you wanted to talk to someone but were afraid that you'd be stigmatized and put on drugs or separated from your unit?
I'm going to let you go first.
While we were in?
I think anytime.
Anytime, but maybe when you were in.
Well, so when I came back, I was having some depression and like anxiety issues. But it was actually, my unit was, my platoon sergeant, I should say, was understanding about it. And I went to behavioral health and I talked to them, basically told them what happened over there. And the only thing they could do for me was give me pills. I talked to a lady for about 45 minutes, and then she said that I could come back and talk to her in a month. And just to see how, like, the meds are working pretty much, not, like, to help me through things. I didn't really like the pills. They didn't really do anything for me. Actually, one of the pills that they prescribed me made me very angry.
Very angry.
Yeah. But, I mean, I honestly didn't care about the stigma because I knew something was wrong with me. Like, you can label me what you want. Like, I need to get help. When I realized I wasn't going to get the help and they were just going to give me VA Skittles, that's when I stopped going. I stopped taking those pills.
Yeah. I mean, similar. When I came back, I had problems sleeping. The only thing that could get me to sleep was drinking. And so I did go to the VA. I did, but I didn't want to tell. At the time, I don't think I recognized either. I just said, hey, just please give me something to sleep. So I guess I did ask for the pills, but they didn't really want to dig any further either. And it's not a stab at the VA either. They're overworked and underpaid. But it wasn't until recently when I was like, this is not getting better. And so I did not go to the VA, though. I went to a primary care provider, and it was when we were going through counseling. I did a lot of talk therapy first before getting on to any medication. But that can only go so far sometimes. So I was, I do have like anxiety medications and things like that. And, but I feel like you shouldn't take any medication unless you're doing talk therapy.
Well, we have been fortunate enough to have a woman share her story. One time she was on 18 different drugs at once prescribed by the VA.
I'm not surprised.
And she kind of called it medicating normal. If she didn't feel the things she feels, she would have really have not been normal. So what you felt was normal was the position she always maintained. And she thought about suicide 17, 18 times. But she was on 18 different drugs by the VA, including some of them that have lasting effect for many, many years.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, I feel like the doctors are told, if there's no pain, there's no problem.
Right.
I just recently went to the VA and was complaining about some physical pains. We're not at the mental pains yet. And instead of saying, let's take an x-ray, let's take an MRI, let's see what's going on, it was, okay, well, I'll prescribe you pain medication and lidocaine patches and some ointment, and I'll send them to you. Is that okay? But what's wrong with me? Can we figure that piece out? But there's so many of us. And we weren't prepared to come back so differently than we went when we went over there. And I've talked to people who have been overseas. We know Brent, who's been over there, 9 times.
There has to be a freaking limit.
Yeah. First of all, there needs to be a limit. But he's been overseas 9 times.
Wow.
In combat. And, he's infantry. And him and I have talked, and him and his wife and I and the 4 of us have talked, and it's the same. Because I asked him, I'm like, does it get worse? He goes, it gets better, actually. Because you know what to expect. Mm-hmm. I'm like, okay.
Comfortable environment for him after a while.
Yeah, and it's like, that's sad.
That's why you hear a lot of guys saying it was easier over there. You know what to expect. You know what to do.
Wow. Well, man, you guys have shared quite a bit with us tonight, and it's been excellent being able to speak with you guys and your experiences, and I know you guys were very vulnerable in some of these things. Is there anything else that you want the listeners to know or that you want to say before we, end our time together tonight?
Yeah. If you're a veteran and you have these feelings, talk to somebody. It does help. And I mean, I'm not going to say that medication does help, but it can. It all depends. The main thing is to talk about it. Be vulnerable. It will help.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I just want to, again, for all the veterans that are listening, or for anyone who knows a veteran listening, it's totally different asking someone, how are you doing, than how are you feeling?
Yep.
How are you feeling? And it doesn't matter what you did overseas. You could have been a FOBIT. That's okay, because you saw stuff. You still saw wreckers coming in. You still anything. Just
you're in a war zone.
Yeah, you don't know what's going to happen. So please talk about it. Get help. Reach out to anybody. Reach out to a stranger if you have to. Yeah. But the more you talk about it, the better it's going to get after the hump. But there is a bright side. Well,
Zach, Salina, thank you so much for your service, for your sacrifice for our country. and for sharing your story with us tonight. And we're going to go ahead and sign off from the Dog Tag Podcast at the St. Charles County Veterans Museum. The Dog Tag is brought to you by the St. Charles County Veterans Museum. The museum is a 501c3 nonprofit business. Do you like our podcast? With your support, we'll continue to bring you great programming. If you'd like to donate, go to sccvetsmuseum.org and click on Donate.